Hello, everybody in LinkedIn and on YouTube. If you're joining us live, welcome. I'm very excited to be here on a Creative Lifescaping live interview series to find out how people who you might not otherwise think are creative, how they've used creativity to make their lives better and to become a better human. And I am so excited today to have as my guest, Molly Angel. Now, Molly is a change management expert with extensive experience in operations and change management. And she specializes in the implementation of healthcare, technology, and other complex environments, which I don't actually even really know what, it's such a large scope. I don't even really understand what like a day-to-day would look like. So I'm so excited to dive in and learn more. Molly has had the opportunity to adapt to different countries and has learned other languages to successfully navigate those cultures. And she's a consistent supporter of charitable organizations where she can help them achieve their goals. Molly works with all aspects of project and change management within clinical and financial operations and large integrated health systems. She holds an MBA from Xavier University and a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from Miami University. That seems like a great place to go to Miami. So, please join me in welcoming Molly Angel. Hi, Molly.
Good morning, Caroline.
How are you?
I'm just fine, thank you. Delighted to be here and having this chat with you today.
Thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited to learn more because I really know very little about how change and project management would look in a healthcare environment. Obviously, as a veterinarian, I know healthcare and from a vet standpoint, but tell me a little bit about what interested you in that area and basically how you got from like kid making mud pies to doing change management today.
Sure. Well, I don't know if I'll start all the way back, but let me jump in a little bit in the middle, and then I can go back a little bit more in history. But I worked in healthcare operations for many years. I did work in like cardiovascular surgical services and cardiology, and had responsibility for ICUs, pharmacy, a lot of clinical operations. And I then segued into project management and, certifications and Lean, Six Sigma, et cetera. And I kept noticing that although on paper and by every measure that we had of project success, everything, all the boxes were ticked, that there were still people who were crying in the bathroom. They weren't happy with the change. They felt disenfranchised. They felt that they didn't, really understand why the change had come about. And so things would be adopted either partially or not at all. And so I kind of thought to myself, well, what's up with that? Why everything else looks perfect? Why are people unhappy? And really by just sort of fortuitous set of events, learned more about the change management discipline, which I then got certification in and have really been much more devoted to. So I have sort of both halves in my background, understanding the technical and business objectives that are really focused on in project management, and then the human objectives in change management. Change management really is about helping to engage and liberate people in the change process so that they really commit to it. And what you end up with at the end of the day is a fully adopted new technology or new process. And in healthcare, life sciences, pharma, that can take many forms, but almost always it has to do with either changes in procedure, changes in technology, new innovations in technology. And although the pace of change is pretty quick in healthcare on one hand, on the other hand, it's also an extremely challenging environment to make changes because of things like regulatory issues, for example. So you have to really have the big picture and the small picture in mind at the same time, because change is all personal. People change individually, but the larger systemic change has to work as a part of a process. And that's why having a discipline like change management can really help you with that engagement.
So it sounds like a massive jigsaw puzzle, right?
So sometimes it is, because, change happens in complex environments, and you can't hold one thing constant while you get something right. You have to really be able to work within the dynamics and the continually evolving dynamics in order to ensure that what you're implementing and what you're asking people to become very, versed in as a new process or a new technology kind of matches that flow of the complex environment, because, especially in healthcare, you can't just say, wait a minute, let's clear out the ICU for a couple days while we get this figured out.
Yeah. 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 There's so many, like you said, in your bio, you mentioned complex systems. Like, I don't think you can get much more complex than healthcare or like ICU or something like that, with so many different types of people and so many different stakeholders that need to be accounted for when you're doing something like change.
Absolutely.
Project. Yeah. One of the things that really intrigued me about your bio, I'd love to explore a little bit, is you said that you'd lived in other countries. So like, tell me a little bit about, your experience working abroad, whether it's personal or in the field of change management, or how that impacted you.
Well, now I can roll back tape a little bit to after Mud Pies, but you mentioned my undergraduate university, Miami University of Ohio, as we call it, the real Miami.
Oh, Miami University is in Ohio?
It is in Ohio. It's in Oxford, Ohio. There's an area in Ohio, the Miami River, the Tamiami Trails. It was one of the indigenous tribes in the area was the Miami. So as I say, the real Miami.
I had no idea, except for it reminds me, on a total tangent, my husband told me about this joke that a radio station did in his town of Winnipeg, and it was like a draw to go see the Super Bowl in Miami, I think. And I'm wondering if that's what it was. And it was like a joke. They ended up, or maybe it was, anyway.
It could have been, because I think they have done the Super Bowl in the other Miami.
But I think that was the thing. The Super Bowl was in Miami. And so they made people think they were taking them to the Super Bowl, but they took them to a bar in some other small town.
Maybe in Ohio. Although the name of the town is Oxford. So, much confusion because, Oxford. But it was a great place to be an undergrad for many different reasons. It's a state school, but it has sort of an amazing reputation for being, fairly innovative in their approach. And it was right up the road because I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. So it was fairly local for me. But one of the things that I did while I was at school there is I went to the Miami University European program. And it's virtually a branch campus. There was a provost of the university who was Luxembourg native. Actually, very interesting backstories with him. He was one of the Nuremberg interrogators. Anyway, he was a very interesting individual, John Dolleboy. And he established this branch campus of Miami University in his native country of Luxembourg. So we've just completed like the 53rd year of the program, something like that. So it goes back quite a way. And I spent my junior year abroad at the Miami University in Luxembourg. And that probably more than anything else made a major pivot in my life, because getting interested in living overseas, we traveled extensively. Luxembourg is no bigger than a minute. So to, go to another country means you can go for lunch in Germany and dinner in, France, because it's so small. We just traveled extensively as a group, and the group itself became very bonded. I still meet with my Luxembourg classmates every Friday at 2:00 for a little Zoom call. And it's a very interesting group of folks, very august group of folks that I've remained very, attached to and friends with all these years. But that probably really was what, piqued my interest in the idea of life overseas, Caroline. And then I married and moved to South America a few years later, and lived in Bogota, Colombia for many, many years, and learned to speak Spanish fluently, which always sort of surprises folks that Spanish comes out of a face that looks like this. And loved it, and have a very good and close group of friends from my years in Colombia as well. And I would say that it just really, a little bit of what you said at the beginning, it really gave me sort of a great foundation for having a different lens, having a different perspective, being able to step back and look at things from an entirely different point of view, because I experienced life as an expat and as somebody who needed to adapt and adopt local cultures frequently. Although I can confess that when I moved to Colombia, and the whole idea that, geez, it's noon and where is everybody? We're supposed to be together at noon. And then I learned that, noon means all the way around till it's 1. And once it's 1:00, now we're a little late. But, at first I thought, well, got to get this fixed. There's only 27 million Colombians. I can get this done. And then
Took it
after a
on.
while, I realized, well, that's not really the point.
Yeah, and I love that you say, like, you, excuse me, start to see things through other points of view, and that's actually something that has been proven in the literature. CEOs who have lived abroad are more creative than CEOs who have not, and it's this idea, like you said, of seeing things from different perspectives. And I would imagine that helps you in your work with change management, because
Absolutely.
it's probably easier for you to put yourself in a position of someone that you might not otherwise really understand their point of view. Is that?
Yeah. No, one of the really important parts of my change management process is sort of an ethnographic review of, what the environment is. I use a methodology that I learned many years ago called Pear: people, artifacts, environment, relationships, just to understand all the context of how this work is happening now. It's not just a sort of a value stream map, which is a lean change management, lean project management term. It's not just, looking at things from step by step, but really understanding, again, that complex environment. Who's counting on who? What's the environment like? Who are the people that are all involved in this? What are the artifacts that they use and why do they use them? Really understanding that very deeply and stepping back a lot, and not sort of, and also staying very low on the ladder of inference. You don't make judgments about what you see, you just observe. And then you start to ask questions, you start to ask people to help you understand why they're doing what they're doing. I find almost inevitably in the groundwork or in the initial work in change management, that can really inform a lot about how you identify potential areas of resistance, because all change is resistant, even change that people want. There's just a natural tendency to resist it, because where you are right now, even if you're not happy, is familiar, and you feel competent and you feel like you know what's expected. And so moving away from that always, surfaces some resistance. So really this ethnographic approach that I take, I think really is borne out a lot from the fact that I did that myself for many years, being part of just very new and very unfamiliar environments.
Yeah. Excuse me. For anybody who's just joining us, I just want to introduce you to Molly Angel. We're chatting about change management in healthcare, which is her area of expertise and working in complex systems. And Molly, you've been talking about, that idea of change is uncomfortable, even if it's a good change. And I love what you said about this. And in my head, popped up to this mindfulness of sitting in the moment without judging what's going on and without putting storylines on people until you've had a chance to sit. And that is very familiar with me to this idea of sitting in ambiguity and being comfortable with ambiguity. So I would love to know what your thoughts are on whether you have a deliberate practice that helps you sit comfortably in that ambiguity before you start developing your plan and your ideas, or if that's something that's evolved. I'd love to hear more about that.
Interestingly, a lot of that has to do with language, and really paying attention to and noticing the way people describe things and the language they use around their process or around what's important to them or what they're expecting, listening to the terms they use, listening to the way they describe what they're doing, what they want to see happen. You start to learn a lot about a culture and the norms and what it is that you should understand and pay attention to and be respectful of when you do that. If people call it coaching, that's the term that is important to them, and that's what you need to say. If they say professional development, that's what you say. So a lot of it does really revolve around language. And I think speaking other languages does make me very sensitive to or aware of the fact that, there's no direct translation sometimes. You just have to steep yourself in it and start to understand it and take it with the kind of cultural norms that it comes with, because language is a very important part of how people think and express themselves, obviously, but also how they do things and how they relate to each other and how it forms their society and their practices.
Yeah, I've been a victim, or not a victim, I've been a perpetrator of that, where I've thought, well, same difference, this word or that word. With my work as, I can't think of an example, but working as a vet or even with my kids and saying something that I think is inconsequential, but it does really matter. to some people how you use that language. And I think that, it also gives them a safe place, because it's that comfort and familiarity, even if it's not the correct term. If they're using the term in a certain way in their culture, then if you start changing that, then, it's shifting sand under their feet for when you're already dealing with change in your job.
Yeah, I can think of one example that really kind of caught me by surprise a few years ago, working with a large company, that they talked about their claims always, like, what are they claiming? They didn't talk about, what are we promising people, or what is it that we want people to understand. They talked about their claims. And so really understanding and listening to and learning as much as I could about, well, what does that mean to you in the context of the work we're doing, so that I would use the term appropriately, even because obviously it has many different definitions. So I think that, that sort of like listening, muscle to really notice, and to, not do that thing where you kind of like start to interpret, go up the ladder of influence. Oh, well, this is what they're talking about, or this is what they mean, is kind of the important part of the front end process that I use a lot with change management, which is really just establishing a really great foundation for the communications, for the training, for all of the mechanical and tactical steps that you need to engage, so that at the end of the day, people are committed to and optimizing the new process and new technology. Hopefully it establishes that the kind of tone and tenor that you need all the way through to meet resistance. You're never going to avoid resistance. What you want is for people to feel safe and to have the way to tell you about their resistance, so that you can understand it as early as possible.
Yeah, that's incredible. And actually, when you talked about this ladder of inference, I love that. I'm going to hopefully, with your permission, use that, because I'm so bad at that.
It's not mine. It's a very well established, sort of visual and, thought process of, staying low on that ladder, mere observation. Then, like the next is, assessment and judgment and so forth. And staying very low on that early in the process is critical, is what I find.
Well, it's funny, because as you're talking about that, I'm like, I think I was jumping up the ladder of inference when you were talking about the ladder of inference, which is a bit meta, because I was like, oh, it's like mindfulness, right? So I started putting like a judgment on what you're talking about. But I think, and this is one of the things we do as humans and as creative beings, is we make these connections.
Oh, I think so. I think that's a really key component of creativity. And earlier this year, a book club, one of the great things of the pandemic is all these great, new groups you're part of. And I'm part of a really amazing group of women who does a book club every Friday. And we chose to explore The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron together. And it was really because we all felt that we wanted to inject some more mindfulness, intentionality, sort of the way that creativity can really nurture your well-being and your mindfulness, and also hopefully just, kind of infuse into your work and the way that you see the world. And so she has such a beautiful process of kind of gently challenging you, sometimes, very, in your face a bit challenging you, but really moving you through understanding how even very simple and daily acts of creativity, which she encourages you to indulge in, really do start to shape a little bit more about your mindfulness and about your creative sort of, bent and leanings.
Yeah, I love Julia Cameron. It's not a light read. So for a first book on creativity, you guys jumped right in.
Dove right in there, didn't we, Caroline?
Yeah, you did. Are you still doing your morning pages or whatever?
I do. Now that was something that I struggled with at first, because I thought, what do I have to say to myself? And what I learned the first couple of weeks is, boy, I can be really whiny. I used it as a little bit of a vent. And then finally it was like, nah, I started to get a little bit more observational, a little bit less sort of judgmental. I started to use it more in, like giving myself permission to explore things that were just sort of interesting to me, or that I realize I think about but don't really spend time thinking about why is that important to me. So yeah, the daily pages is something that I've actually really come to sort of like, and it like nurtures me on a daily basis.
I'm the same. I've tried it and I've never maintained a practice, which
I mean, there are days when it's like, just not going to happen today, but I inevitably go back to it and do enjoy it. And, there were some other things that, besides the daily pages, which I think is what most people, think of when they're thinking of the artist's way. But, just that whole idea that, do 5 creative things in the next week. And they can include things like, making a new type of recipe that you've never made before. And, gardening. I never gardened in my life. I have a flower box on my balcony.
Oh.
So just,
is that prompted by the artist's way, your flower box?
Yeah, just thinking about doing things like that I never would have really put under that sort of rubric or category of being creative. And it feels like a good complement to, the daily pages, to think about those 5 things a week. And I still do a lot of it.
I love that. And I love the focus, like you're not alone. And a lot of people, as humans, we are creative every day. But I think we have this definition of creativity that has to include something epic, something artistic. And when you're talking about making a meal or making, doing something in the gardening, these are all creative acts that do increase your mood the next day. And they do help you to be more mindful and explore your own unique style of creativity. So that's definitely been my experience anyway, that you've been having. So I know that, so tell me the things that you do that are creative in general, that light you up. And, maybe what are your obstacles to doing those creative things? And I know you have a podcast, so I'm going to put that up here. So that's very creative. So tell me more about like what
the podcast was, excuse me, I didn't mean to talk over you a bit. I got excited there. My podcast is a little bit of my attempt at sort of my business creativity, I guess, if that's a category. Sure. I realize that change management as a concept or as an endeavor, probably needs to be, something that folks can grab and understand and say, well, what happens? What does this look like? And what can I expect? And I do a newsletter, so I try to, put things into words and, spell things out about what change management looks like and, how it works and what you can expect. But I felt that a podcast would help those words come like off the page, as it were, and make them, create another dimension of information or a different approach to information. I like listening to podcasts. I like the idea of kind of like those word pictures that you can envision as you're listening to a well-crafted, podcast. And I just decided that would be another modality that would help people understand, why change management and what does change management mean and what does it mean for me and how do I understand how I can, adapt principles of change management to improve my situation. As I say in the podcast, it's, it's not just about business. It's, you can adopt these principles for your life and, your relationships and so forth. It's really about understanding what the components are of people making changes and helping support them through those changes so that you can ultimately, adopt what it is that you want to change.
Which hopefully is making their life better. It's just helping them through that process of seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did a real small series right at the beginning of the pandemic, talking about how, the world needs to change and just looking at examples of, pretty significant changes in our life and, what created that opportunity for change and did it land successfully? It's been talked about quite a bit since, but I talked a lot about what it took to get people to actually use seatbelts and, spoiler alert, it was legislation. Yeah. And, how the world changed because of the advent of the powerful, drugs and vaccines and so forth we have to combat, the dread disease of tuberculosis and, what were the missteps and, steps along the way to getting to the point where tuberculosis is no longer the scourge that it used to be.
Yeah. Or even
And then
small
also
pucks.
a
I
very
still have my, like, I can't show you because I got a shirt on, but I have the smallpox scar.
smallpox scar.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a
Yeah.
lot of us do. Yeah. And the
Yeah.
other example was, the successful adoption of the ATM, which to us seems like so mundane, but it was pretty revolutionary at one point. And what did it take to get people to make a change like that?
Yeah.
So I tried to at least give some historical examples to give people like a sense of, oh yeah, these are all the elements that go together. And some of it's serendipity and some of it's very intentional. And some of it's just, situational, which is kind of what we're in right now is, learning to adapt and to change to sort of a constantly situationally changing environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that constantly changing is your wheelhouse. That makes me think about what you've observed with your experience with helping organizations move through change, whether it's an organization or an individual characteristic that maybe, what do you notice about individuals or organizations that change more easily than other ones? And what do you think, if you think creativity or innovation has anything to do with that?
Well, I don't know if I would say creativity and kind of it's like pure form of imaginative sort of process, which is what I always think of creativity. But I think there's elements of it. What I've seen is that the folks who are doing the best, in my never to be humble opinion, are folks that have been very transparent and who have been very vulnerable and have said, we don't have all the answers. But based on what we know now, this is how we think we should move forward, giving people plenty of opportunity to understand the why behind what we're doing and why we think this is the best way to do it so that, people can get on board with it. And then most of the change that I see that's been successful is a team-based change. Instead of trying to do everything for a whole company or everything for a whole department or everything for like some giant division, really thinking about people's teams. Like who are the 12 people that you're super dependent on, every day to get your work done? Who is that smaller, very, viable and vibrant group of individuals that needs to really depend on each other, and making sure that those teams sort of have the ability to establish the norms or their mechanisms or the way they're going to move through these changes and continue to work effectively with each other. I think the companies that are doing the best job at thinking in a team-based approach to, even simple questions like, do we come into the office? Do we work from home? What's best for this team in order to get their work accomplished? Those are the folks that I see being the most successful at this kind of ever evolving and, no one can really put the dart in the center of the dartboard right now, environment that we're in.
Yeah, you've touched on a few things that, if I am interpreting them right, is this humility of leadership and this intellectual humility of not knowing the answer, which also ties into your approach to this order of inference of like sitting in the unknown and sitting in that ambiguity, which is one of the key factors, I believe, in creativity. So while it's not directly related to creativity, I wonder, though, when you talk about this team approach, if I'm understanding what you're saying, right, you're saying that you're giving the team a little bit of autonomy to move within that change, which in itself is a creative process. Like, how are we going to move within this framework as opposed to like, you have to follow these exact steps? They're kind of creating their path to that change a little bit more autonomously than a directed approch. Is that
Right.
that kind of
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. I mean, we can't just, throw out all the rules, but I think that in the sense that there are modes of working or, manner and way work gets done right now between remote and on-site, and sort of, the support that some team members need because they've got, 3 children under the age of 5 at home versus someone whose kids are all hopefully off to college. Maybe they're at home too, but there's just dynamics within a group of humans that are formed into a team to get work accomplished that I think are more present now than they have been in the past. There's less of that sort of like, I used to have a boss who used to say the important thing is to smooth out the waves so you can see the dolphins. So smoothing out those waves so that those dolphins can appear and understand what they are so that they don't, they're not out there unseen and you don't know about them, I think is really what I'm seeing the successful strategies, which is, let's get some of the basics figured out for this team. Should they be in the office? Should they be remote? Should, the folks who do this specific task, should they come in on Tuesdays, letting the team really adopt the norms that work the best for them, given all of the challenges and given the current uncertainty of the environment, and just saying, let's do this until we see that we need to make a change. And then, making people feel that they're at least part of that process and have some say in what might be happening to them. Those sort of blanket, edicts, like we will all be back in the office, September.
Yeah.
Well, there was a September 1st and, figure it out. And, this is important to our customers. I don't think that message goes over very well right now.
No, the absoluteness of the message, and from someone who doesn't have kids at home or in college, or you can't. And I think that's where your international experience is helpful in that you realize there's so many different points of view, and reading fictional books is another way that people can embrace that ambiguity and learn how to see things from other people's point of view, because then you realize that there is not one right answer for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Exactly.
So, awesome. On that note, so I just wanted to put up here, so if you want to connect with Molly on LinkedIn, we've got her connection here. And I think if you go into the LinkedIn event, she's tagged in the event as a speaker, so you can find that. And check out her website at angelchangemanagement.com, and you can find her podcast information there, and a great blog. And I have to say, Molly, I love your newsletters. They're so thorough and so intentional and so packed with information. I think that there's such great value. Even though I'm not in the change management field, I find it really interesting to read about your point of view.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
No worries. Yeah, you're one of the newsletters that I subscribe to that I'm just like, wow, like that's a lot of, not like a lot meaning it's too much, just like you've obviously put so much thought and intention into creating something helpful for people. So I think that.
Thank you. Well, I certainly hope so. And I appreciate those kind words.
Oh, no worries. So now that I've said that, we're going to flip it, and we're coming to our truth or dare section. So you have chosen a truthful story that maybe was a bit embarrassing or put you in an uncomfortable position, because that's part of what engaging creativity is stepping into the unknown and doing something and not worrying so much about what people think about. So what was your story for your truth?
So one of the things that I, sort of experienced when I first moved to Colombia is becoming part of a really large family. I mean, I have a pretty good sized family here in the United States, but I was all of a sudden one of like 40 people at lunch every Sunday. And, this is just the immediate family, and just, personalities, from one end of the spectrum to the other, from people who would never speak to me because, well, that accent, my gosh, to other people who were just, super warm and embracive, but, this really large family. So all of a sudden I was part of this huge family dynamic. And my one sister-in-law in particular, who lived next door to me, which is kind of a cultural thing that I was really like, oh my gosh. And she used to come and do things like open my refrigerator and say, that's the wrong kind of butter. That's too expensive. Or, criticize anything, the arrangement of your living room is not very, inviting. Anything you can think of. She would just have like a little word of criticism. And at first I was just so offended, and it was just like driving me like to just feel like, constantly battered by this. And I don't know what happened, but one day it just flipped in my mind like a light switch. And I was like, wait a minute, I can do this too. This is the way she expresses how she thinks about things, and, probably her way of caring, because otherwise why bother mentioning it? And so I just started to indulge in it too. And I would say things to her like, the salsa today, not your best effort. Or, oh, I noticed your kids, when they were going off to school yesterday, and, the Nana's hair was kind of a mess. I mean, I just realized that this was how she expressed, the fact that I'm noticing you and I care enough to criticize. And it just made my life so much easier once I realized that.
Could she take it? That's my biggest
yeah. Oh yeah. She was, now we were on the same wavelength. Now we were kindred spirits.
That's so funny. Yeah. Your salsa's not your best work today. That's Can I ask you, I know we're over time, but if you have time, can I ask a follow-up question on that?
Sure.
Did that help you generalize to because one of the biggest barriers of creativity is fear of judgment and criticism. So did that relationship help you weather criticism or not?
That's a good point because, I think I sort of assume, I'm from the Midwest, we're just inevitably super nice people and, we're just low key and so forth. But, the idea of being criticized or being rejected or whatever, oh my gosh, you would just never do that. And I would experience it in a very sort of vulnerable place, which is what she was doing to me. So, there's probably partly a spillover effect that I'm, less vulnerable to criticism because what I learned, by having the opportunity to be exposed to somebody who used criticism to connect, I guess, that, it doesn't always mean it's something about you. It's really more about, well, that's how they view the world and that's how they express themselves. And even though the arrow is pointed at me, it doesn't really have to pierce me because that's about them, not so much about me. So I think it did give me an opportunity, maybe a little bit earlier in life. I think we all arrived there at some point, but maybe it gave me a chance a little bit earlier in life to depersonalize, the negative or the judgment that we do inevitably fear.
Yeah, I think that's such an important message to depersonalize that judgment because I find too that the most hateful and the most biting and the most deeply hurtful, because we feel criticism like physical pain. We feel judgment like
exactly
physical pain. But when you get that harsh, very unhelpful, not blunt criticism, that's different, but the very hurtful criticism, I'm sure you worked with lots of people. It's more about them, I believe. It's that crabs in the bucket idea. It threatens sometimes people when you speak differently or speak out against something. And I think having that sense of the arrow, I like that expression, the arrow is pointed at you, but it doesn't have to pierce you, I think is critical to being able to make a difference in the world.
Yeah. Otherwise, you don't open the door and step outside, right?
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. And that's what some people want because they're afraid to step outside. So they want everybody else to feel that way too, I think. Not that I'm an armchair psychologist, but
I was going to say,
sorry.
I was going to say, I don't know that I can extrapolate to everyone.
No.
But I do notice that there are patterns, especially in the work that I do, that you always talk about the early adopters and the laggers and so forth. I don't find that to be necessarily true about changing your work practice. What I see is that there are people who are very afraid to be seen as being incompetent because of the way they feel about, the pride in their work and how much their work identifies them as individuals, and really understanding and respecting that and, still helping them move to a new level of competency, move to a new way of thinking or doing their work is a big part of change management because the fear of incompetence is one that we all hold.
Yeah. I agree. And as a veterinarian, I deeply feel that as well. And the stakes are high, right? In healthcare. So people could die. So it's important to have high standards and to have that competence.
Absolutely.
And how do you hold that as well as change, but with that same level of competence? That's an interest. Yeah, it's very true. So thank you so much, Molly,
for joining. You're welcome, Caroline.
Share a little bit about how can people reach you and what's the best way people would, be able to work with you? Where's your sweet spot?
So I really work with healthcare, life sciences, pharma, as they are contemplating technological and process change. I help them ideally on the very front end of their process, identify what the human factors of change are going to be involved in their project, how much it's going to impact, how many team members, what, the impact is going to be. Is it going to be just a, overwhelmingly big impact on them? There's a lot of the unusual suspects in change, people that you don't really understand that it's going to change for them, but assessing it on the front end and understanding what level of change that the unusual suspects in a process are going to be impacted is important too. And really helping them map out how to move through communication, through training, through all the channels and modalities of the project management process, the stakeholder analysis and so forth, how to really bring that together so that you put the human factors of change on an equal footing with the technical and business objectives. Because the goal of any new process, any new technology is to have full adoption, full realization of the ROI that was envisioned, the return on investment that was envisioned. And, you only get that when you have a fully implemented, fully adopted new process or new technology. So it's really my role to help a team and leaders of teams to understand how to surface the resistance that's going to be inevitable and have mitigation strategies around it so that you can move through all the levels of commitment right up to the ultimate, which is optimization. So yeah, you can reach me on my website. That's probably the best place to go, angelchangemanagement.com, and just schedule some time with me and talk to me about your change process or your new implementation. And I'd be happy to help you start to craft a great strategy to ensure success.
That's awesome. And you will bring your ladder of inference with you with only 1 or 2 left.
I will.
And definitely subscribe to Molly's newsletter. You know, even if you're just learning about change management or the principles of change management and how that, you know, I've taken a course in change management through my certificate, but I keep learning more and more from your newsletter. So thank you so much for that. And
You're
thank
welcome.
you so much for joining me today and
you,
sharing your story of your critical sister-in-law and all of the great knowledge you have about change management.
Absolutely. Delighted to be here. Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.